It was the crack of dawn on Christmas morning when Cole Brennan stepped out of his home, his boots crunching through the snow as he made his way toward the barn. The air was crisp, a sharp bite in the silence of the Montana landscape. The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the sky a soft pink as he rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the sorrow that clung to him every December 25th. It had been 3 years since Sarah, his wife, passed away, and every Christmas felt like the same aching reminder. He often found solace in the routine, the sound of his horses in the barn, the smell of hay and leather. But this morning was different. As Cole neared the front porch of his house, he saw two small figures huddled on the steps, their faces barely visible in the thin morning light. His heart skipped a beat. At first, he thought they might be stray animals, but as he stepped closer, he saw that they were children, twin girls, wrapped in what looked like thin blankets, their faces pale with frostbite, eyes wide open yet eerily still. He rushed toward them, his breath catching in his throat. Hey now," he murmured, gently lifting them into his arms. They were shockingly light, their bodies trembling with the cold. The porch door creaked behind him as he hurried them inside, quickly wrapping them in blankets near the crackling fire. The warmth from the hearth seemed to revive them slightly, but they didn't speak. They just sat there, staring at the fire, the silence heavy between them. As he set to work making hot cocoa for them, his mind raced. Who were these girls? Why had they appeared on his doorstep? And why wouldn't they speak? He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something beyond the cold that had nearly frozen them. He watched them, his eyes narrowing in concern as the twins glanced at each other, their gazes locked in silent communication. It wasn't long before Cole noticed something odd. The girls were wearing identical lockets, small silver ones that glinted faintly in the firelight. He studied them more closely, but there was no name or clue as to who they might belong to. He glanced back at the girls, but they remained silent, their eyes never leaving him, as though waiting for something. Minutes passed in a strange quiet, the twins not making a sound, just watching. He began to feel uneasy, wondering if he should call the sheriff or perhaps take them into town. But something inside him, something deep in his gut, told him to wait. He couldn't explain it, but it was almost as if they needed him, if only he could figure out how. As he pondered, Cole's mind drifted to Sarah. It was Christmas, the anniversary of her death. He couldn't help but think of the joy she'd brought him, how much he'd lost, how much they'd both lost when their child had died at birth, just weeks before Sarah. He wiped away a tear, blinking against the sudden rush of grief. It wasn't the time to dwell on that, though. He had these girls to think about now. The twins remained silent, each retreating into her own thoughts. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth, but the chill never quite left Cole's heart. He set the hot cocoa in front of them, hoping the warmth would comfort them. They drank eagerly, the cocoa disappearing faster than he'd ever seen. They hadn't eaten much, perhaps nothing, since their arrival. Still, they didn't speak. They just watched him. He thought of calling the sheriff again, but decided to wait. He had to know who these girls were, and what was behind the note he'd found pinned to their coat. The note read, "Their mother said you'd keep them safe. Their names are Emma and Eliza. She had no one else to turn to. Forgive her." The handwriting was unfamiliar. It didn't make sense. He didn't know any Emma or Eliza, nor could he recall a woman who'd looked for help in this way. The note felt like a mystery he wasn't prepared for. Who was this mother? What did she mean by forgive her? Why hadn't she come with the girls herself? A sudden noise broke his thoughts, soft whispering from the guest room down the hall. His heart stopped. For a brief moment, he wondered if he had imagined it. But no, it was there again, the faintest sound of two voices speaking in a language he couldn't understand. Cole stood up from his seat, heart pounding. He walked slowly down the hallway, his steps careful as he reached the door to the guest room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, he could hear the twins speaking to each other. Emma's voice was soft but filled with a certain intensity. "Do you think he's the one?" Eliza's voice followed, quieter and more unsure. Mama said he was. But what if he says no? Emma's reply was calm, almost resigned. Then we'll have nowhere to go. The room went silent. Cole stood frozen, his hand still resting on the door handle. His heart raced. They could speak, just not to him. A shiver ran down his spine as he processed the words he'd overheard. What was this all about? And why did they seem to be speaking of him like they knew him? He pulled away from the door, a feeling of dread filling his chest. When he returned to the living room, Cole found a photograph had slipped from the pocket of Eliza's coat. It was a woman he didn't recognize, but something about her seemed oddly familiar. The mystery was deepening with every passing minute. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to get answers. But for now, the girls needed him. They were alone, and until he understood what was truly happening, Cole knew he couldn't turn them away. Not after everything he had lost. As the snow continued to fall outside, Cole sat by the fire, the twins quietly resting beside him. The only sound in the house was the soft crackling of the flames. And in the silence, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned gray and cold, but the house was filled with the warmth of the fire and the scent of breakfast cooking. Cole moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing eggs and bacon for the twins, though they still hadn't spoken a word to him. The silence between them felt like a barrier he wasn't sure how to break. He set the breakfast down on the table, sitting across from them, trying not to pressure them, but hoping they might open up. They didn't. Their eyes remained fixed on the food, and though they ate hungrily, there was a wariness in their actions. It was like they were still unsure whether to trust him, whether they could let their guard down. After breakfast, Cole decided to show them the ranch, hoping the fresh air and the wide open space might help them relax. He walked them around the barn, showing them the horses, the hayloft, and the corral. The girls watched everything with wide eyes, but they still said nothing, as if the world was too large, too overwhelming for them to make sense of. When they reached the far pasture, Cole introduced them to his favorite horse, a gentle mare named Lady, who he'd raised from a foal. To his surprise, Eliza smiled as she reached out to gently stroke Lady's nose. Emma, standing a little further away, watched a flock of snowflakes fall from the sky, her lips curving upward in a hesitant smile. Cole felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were starting to warm up to him. That evening, after supper, as the house settled into a quiet stillness, something unusual happened. As Cole sat in his favorite chair by the fire, Emma's locket, which she had been fiddling with all day, suddenly snapped open. The tiny photograph inside it caught the firelight, and Cole's heart skipped a beat when he saw the woman in the picture. The image was small and faded, but the face was unmistakable. It was Rebecca, the woman from the photograph he had found the night before. The same woman he had once loved. The realization struck him like a blow. These were Rebecca's daughters. His mind spun as memories from 10 years ago flooded back. Before Sarah, before the heartache. He had been engaged to Rebecca Hayes, the woman who had left town without a word, breaking his heart. She had disappeared from his life without a trace, leaving him to wonder what had happened. He had never gotten over her, but he had eventually moved on and met Sarah. Yet now, here were Rebecca's children, sitting in his living room, their identical lockets and silent presence, all the proof he needed. Cole felt a mix of shock, disbelief, and confusion. Why had Rebecca left them with him? Where was she now? Why hadn't she come to him directly? As his thoughts raced, he found himself staring at the locket again, the photograph of Rebecca looking back at him with a sad, knowing smile. He couldn't explain it, but something about the whole situation felt like a puzzle he wasn't sure he could solve. He had to know the truth. He had to understand what was going on. That evening, as the fire crackled softly in the background, Cole gathered the girls in front of him. He looked at them, his heart heavy with unspoken questions. "I knew your mother once," he began gently, his voice thick with emotion. The girls exchanged a glance, and then Emma, for the first time, nodded. She looked up at him, her gray eyes full of something he couldn't quite place. Hope? Fear? A mix of both? There was a long silence, and Cole felt his chest tighten as he waited for one of them to speak. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Eliza spoke. "Mama said you were a good man," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "She said we could trust you." Cole's breath caught in his throat as the weight of her words sank in. This was Rebecca's legacy, the trust she had placed in him. "Where is she now?" Cole asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Eliza's eyes filled with tears, and Emma spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. "She's coming," she said. "She promised she would. She just needed to rest." The hope in Emma's voice was like a balm to Cole's aching heart, but also made him wonder what was really going on here. Who was this woman, and why had she chosen him to protect her children? That night, as Cole sat by the fire, his mind racing with questions, he kept glancing at the photograph of Rebecca that had fallen from Emma's pocket earlier. It was like the universe had thrown him a lifeline, a way to understand the mystery unfolding in his life. But before he could process everything, the quiet of the house was interrupted by a sound that sent a chill down his spine. The sound of wheels crunching through snow, the unmistakable creak of a wagon approaching. Cole stood abruptly, his heart pounding in his chest. He moved quickly to the door, the dread rising in his chest as he peered through the window. He squinted into the fading light and saw a figure on horseback, leading a wagon slowly up the driveway. His pulse quickened as the wagon stopped in front of the house, and a man stepped down, his dark coat swirling around him like a shadow. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and his cold eyes gleamed with a determination that made Cole's skin crawl. The man walked up to the porch and knocked loudly on the door. Cole opened it cautiously, his hand resting on the doorknob. The man didn't waste any time. "I'm Mr. Cyrus Blackwell," he said coldly, his voice businesslike, "the director of the Helena Orphanage. I'm here for the Hayes girls. They're wards of the state, and they're coming with me." Cole's blood ran cold. His hand tightened around the door handle, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a fire ignite within him. A protective fire that burned fiercely for the girls who were now under his care. "They're not going anywhere until I understand what's happening," Cole said firmly, his voice low but resolute. Blackwell's expression didn't change. He reached into his coat and produced a set of official papers, showing them to Cole. "These girls are fugitives," Blackwell said, his eyes narrowing. "They set fire to my orphanage and ran. They need to be returned to their proper place." Cole's heart raced as he stepped out onto the porch, positioning himself between Blackwell and the twins, who were watching from the doorway, fear etched on their faces. "They're not going anywhere," Cole said, his voice steady but full of authority. "Not until I know what's really going on." Blackwell's face hardened. "You've got 24 hours, Brennan," he said, his voice cutting through the cold air like a knife. "After that, I'll return with the sheriff, and things won't be as easy." With that, he turned and walked back to his wagon, his hired men following silently behind him. Cole stood in the doorway, watching them go, a deep sense of unease settling in his chest. The girls were terrified, hiding behind him as though they had nowhere else to turn. And in that moment, Cole knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them go, not without getting the truth. As he closed the door, he turned to the girls, his heart aching with the weight of what was to come. They had already been through so much, and now, with Blackwell threatening them, they were in danger again. But this time, Cole wasn't going to let them face it alone. Whatever it took, he would protect them. That night, as he lay in bed, his thoughts kept returning to the woman in the photograph. Rebecca, the memory of her smile, her voice, the love they had shared before everything had fallen apart. He had never stopped loving her, and now, with her daughters in his care, he had to figure out what had happened to her. The mysteries were stacking up, but one thing was clear: the fight was just beginning, and Cole would be ready. The next morning, A cold chill hung in the air as Cole prepared for what he knew would be a difficult day. The girls were still frightened, their eyes wide and anxious, unsure of what was about to unfold. He had done everything in his power to keep them safe, but the arrival of Mr. Cyrus Blackwell had thrown their fragile world into chaos. As Cole watched the wagon from the window, his heart pounded. He knew the man wouldn't give up easily. The moment he stepped outside to greet Blackwell, his chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and dread. Blackwell stood tall, his eyes cold and calculating as he walked up the porch steps with an air of authority. "I'm here for the Hayes girls," Blackwell said flatly, producing a set of papers. Cole's stomach twisted. "You can't take them," Cole replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing within him. Blackwell's lip curled in a smirk. "They're wards of estate, Brennan," he said, waving the official papers in front of Cole. "They're fugitives. They set fire to my orphanage, and now I'm taking them back." Cole's protective instincts flared up. He could feel the weight of the girls' frightened eyes on him, their silent pleas for protection. "I don't care what those papers say," Cole said firmly, his body tense as he stepped closer to Blackwell. "These girls are not going anywhere." Blackwell's gaze darkened, his voice low and threatening. "You'll regret this. I'll return with the sheriff and deputies. And when I do, there will be no more talking." With a dismissive wave, Blackwell turned and walked back toward his wagon, but Cole's resolve remained unshaken. Inside, the girls huddled close to him, their bodies trembling. Emma, the older of the two, looked up at him with desperate eyes. "Please, don't send us back. Please, don't let them take us," she whispered, her voice breaking. Eliza clung to his side, her face streaked with tears. "We don't want to go back there. Please, Cole. We don't want to go back to Blackwell." Cole's heart ached as he knelt down to their level, pulling them both into his arms. He didn't know the full extent of what they'd been through, but the terror in their eyes was enough to convince him that he couldn't let them go back to that nightmare. "I need the whole truth right now," Cole said gently but firmly, his hands resting on their shoulders. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she glanced at Eliza, who nodded slightly. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely audible. "We were never supposed to be with him," she began, her words shaking with the weight of the confession. "He's not a good man, Cole. He's not who he says he is." Eliza wiped her eyes before speaking softly, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Our mama, she was so sick. She couldn't take care of us anymore. We were put in Blackwell's orphanage just for a little while until she could get better." Emma nodded. "Mama said she would come for us, but she never could. The orphanage, it was awful. He worked us like slaves, beat us if we didn't obey, and kept us hungry and cold. It was a nightmare." The truth poured out of them in a flood. Emma's words trembled as she spoke of their life in the orphanage, of the abuse and neglect they had endured. They spoke of how their mother, Rebecca, had worked tirelessly as a seamstress in Helena to support them, how she had been diagnosed with consumption, and how she had struggled to keep them fed and clothed. When the state had threatened to take them away, Rebecca had placed them temporarily in Blackwell's orphanage, hoping to get well enough to care for them again. But what Rebecca hadn't known was that Blackwell's orphanage wasn't what it seemed. It wasn't a safe place for children. It was a hellhole where children were forced into servitude, sold off as laborers to the highest bidder, all under the guise of adoption. When Rebecca discovered the truth, she tried to get them back, but Blackwell refused, even forging papers to make it seem like their mother had abandoned them. The pain in Emma's eyes deepened as she spoke of the fire that had given them their chance to escape. "We started the fire," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't big, but it was enough to make the guards panic. We ran while the chaos happened. Mama was waiting for us, but she was too sick to run. She got us as far as here, but then..." Her voice faltered as she struggled to keep her composure. She couldn't go any further. Cole felt a lump form in his throat as Emma's words sank in. The girls had been through so much. far more than any child should have to endure. And Rebecca, the woman he had once loved, had done everything she could to protect them. Mama said you were the only one she could trust, Eliza added softly, her eyes full of unspoken pain. She said you'd keep us safe, that you were the only good man she knew. Cole's heart ached as he looked at the girls, the weight of their confession crashing over him like a tidal wave. He couldn't imagine the horror they had lived through, the fear that had driven them to take such drastic measures to escape. But one thing was clear: they were not going back to Blackwell's orphanage, no matter what it took. He stood up, his mind racing with the decision that lay ahead. "I promise you," he said, his voice firm and steady, "no one is taking you. I won't let them." He looked at them, his heart full of determination. "We're going to fix this. I'll go to town, get Sheriff Dalton, and we'll make sure Blackwell never hurts anyone again." As Cole prepared his horse to ride to town, he could hear the sound of another wagon approaching. The crunch of wheels in the snow made his heart race. He turned around, expecting to see Blackwell returning with the sheriff, but what he saw made his blood run cold. A slow-moving wagon, its driver hunched over, was making its way up the long drive. Cole squinted against the falling snow, trying to make out the figure. As the wagon came into full view, he saw the driver slump over, his body jerking as if the man had lost consciousness. Cole rushed toward him, his heart pounding. As he reached the wagon, the driver collapsed in the snow. Cole knelt down, his hands trembling as he checked for a pulse. It was faint, but the man was alive. He helped the driver up, supporting his weight as they made their way toward the house. And then, as the man's face became clear, Cole froze. It was Rebecca. She was barely conscious, emaciated and deathly pale, her body weak from the months of struggle and illness. Tears sprang to Cole's eyes as he helped her inside, his heart aching for the woman who had once been his love. The girls rushed to her, calling her name, their faces lighting up with a mixture of relief and joy. But even as she was surrounded by her daughters, Cole knew that time was running out for Rebecca. She was far too weak, far too sick. He couldn't believe that after everything, after all the years, Rebecca was finally back. But there was no time to waste. The truth had come, and it was only the beginning of what would be a long, hard road. As Cole helped Rebecca into the warmth of the house, her frail, emaciated form felt shockingly light in his arms. Her body trembled, her skin cold to the touch despite the fire crackling in the hearth, and the blood on her lips was a stark reminder of the toll that consumption had taken on her. The girls were beside themselves with relief, their hands clinging to their mothers, their voices choked with tears. "Mama, Mama, you're here," Emma cried, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and disbelief, while Eliza pressed her face into Rebecca's worn hands, desperate for the warmth of her touch. Cole's heart shattered as he watched them, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and a fierce protectiveness. He could see the toll the years had taken on Rebecca, the gauntness in her face, the hollowed eyes, the shallow breath. She was barely holding on, her strength depleted by months of running, hiding, and battling illness. Gently, he guided her to the couch, helping her sit by the fire, where she collapsed into the cushions, her head falling back in exhaustion. Emma and Eliza immediately began tending to her, fetching blankets, water, and whatever they thought might help, their tiny hands working with frantic care. Cole stood back for a moment, watching the girls, his thoughts racing. He'd always thought that after losing Sarah, he'd never be able to love again, that he'd never allow himself to care for someone the way he had once cared for her. But here, in this room, surrounded by these girls, Rebecca's daughters, the same ones she'd entrusted to his care, he realized just how much he had to give and how much had been taken from him over the years. He could feel the presence of his late wife, Sarah, in the air, too. She had always been kind, compassionate, and strong, traits she had passed down to their unborn child, and now they seemed to echo in the way he cared for the twins. They were a reminder of everything he had lost, but also of everything he still had the chance to protect. When the house grew quiet again, Cole knelt beside Rebecca, his heart heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. She looked up at him through fevered eyes, her face pale, but still beautiful in a way that tugged at his heart. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, a silence that held years of regrets, misunderstandings, and lost love. Then, in a whisper barely above the crackling fire, Rebecca spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice raspy, weak from both illness and emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything." Cole felt a lump in his throat. The words felt like a lifetime of pain wrapped up in those few syllables, but he wasn't angry. Not anymore. He had never truly been angry with her. He had been heartbroken, confused, but never angry. He reached for her hand, brushing his thumb lightly over her skin, as if to comfort her, to tell her that he understood. "Rebecca," he said gently, his voice barely audible. "You don't have to apologize." But she shook her head slowly, tears welling in her eyes as she turned her face toward the fire. "I should have told you everything," she whispered. "I should have told you I was in danger. But I didn't. I was too scared. And I thought I was protecting you by leaving. I never wanted to hurt you, Cole. I loved you. I always have." The words hit Cole like a wave, knocking the breath from his lungs. For a brief moment, he could feel the girl he had once known in her words. The Rebecca he had loved with every ounce of his being. The woman he had believed in so fully. He had spent so many years questioning what had happened, why she had left him without so much as an explanation. But now, as she spoke, he understood. She had been trapped by her father's debts, by Thomas Hayes's violence, and by a life she had never chosen for herself. "Why didn't you come back?" Cole asked softly, his voice filled with the quiet anguish of a man who had loved and lost. Rebecca's eyes fluttered closed as she struggled to find the strength to speak, the weight of her illness apparent in every movement. "My father, he gambled away the family farm," she began, her voice faint but steady. "He owed a fortune to Thomas Hayes, a rancher from the valley. Hayes said he'd forgive the debt if I married him. He didn't give me a choice. He threatened my mother's life if I didn't do what he said." Rebecca's words brought back memories of a time Cole had long buried. He remembered her, young, free, with eyes full of dreams, and he had loved her with everything he had. The news of her sudden departure had crushed him. He never understood why she had left, why she hadn't even said goodbye. But now it made sense. She had been forced into a life she hadn't wanted, and she had made the only choice she could, to protect herself, to protect her family. "I tried to find a way out," Rebecca continued, her voice catching. "But Hayes was a prison. After we married, I had the girls, and they were the only joy I had. But I couldn't leave him. He wouldn't let me. And then the consumption came." Her voice broke with the weight of everything she had been through. "I thought I'd be free when he died, but by then, the damage was done. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't care for my girls. I thought the only way to protect them was to put them in Blackwell's orphanage. I thought it would only be temporary, but then," she trailed off, her body shuddering with the memory of the horror they had endured. "And then Blackwell turned out to be worse than Hayes ever was," she added, her eyes filling with tears. "He was a monster. He used the children, sold them to families who wanted to adopt them, but they were just slaves. He worked them to the bone, and anyone who tried to leave, he made them disappear. I had no idea until it was too late. You should have told me," Cole whispered, his heart heavy with the weight of everything Rebecca had suffered. "I would have helped you. I would have fought for you." Rebecca closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I couldn't," she whispered. "I couldn't risk losing you, Cole. He would have killed you. I had to protect you too." For a long moment, the two of them sat in silence, the weight of their past hanging between them. "I should have fought for you," Cole said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have done more." "No," Rebecca murmured. "You couldn't have known." She looked up at him, her eyes full of the love she had kept hidden for so long. "I'm sorry I hurt you, but I'm so glad you're here now. You're the only one I ever trusted. And now I need you, Cole. I need you to protect my girls. I need you to keep them safe. They have no one else." The words struck him like a blow. She was asking him to do something he had never imagined. Take on the responsibility of raising these girls as his own. The weight of her plea was overwhelming, and for a moment he didn't know how to answer. But then, as he looked at the girls, Emma and Eliza, their faces full of hope and trust, he knew what he had to do. "I'll take care of them, Rebecca," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I promise. I'll keep them safe." She smiled faintly, her eyes closing as if she were finally at peace. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me peace, for showing me that love still existed." And with that, Rebecca's breathing slowed, her frail body finally surrendering to the toll of her illness. She passed quietly, peacefully, her hands still in Cole's. But as she slipped away, Cole knew that her spirit would live on in the love he would give to her daughters. He kissed her forehead softly, a tear falling on her still face, and promised her once again he would keep them safe. As the room grew quiet, Cole sat with Rebecca for a moment longer, his heart breaking for the life she had never had the chance to live. But in that moment, as he looked at Emma and Eliza, he felt the weight of their shared future. He would raise them, protect them, and give them the love they had always deserved. For Rebecca, for Sarah, for the family he had built and would continue to build. The sun had barely risen, and the air was cold as winter wrapped its icy fingers around the ranch. But Cole felt a warmth in his chest, a deep sense of responsibility he hadn't known he could feel. Rebecca's passing had left an empty space in the house, but with it came a clarity of purpose. He would protect the twins, his daughters now, his family, and nothing would stand in his way. The grief was still raw, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. The day after Rebecca had died, the finality of her last words haunted him. He couldn't shake the image of her face, the way her eyes had begged him to care for her girls, to make sure they were never hurt again. He knew he would never be able to undo the years she had spent in pain or the lost time between them. But he could give Emma and Eliza the safety and love they deserved. As Cole stood by the window that morning, staring out at the endless expanse of snow, a wagon approached down the long drive. His heart tightened. He knew it could only be one person, Cyrus Blackwell. He had promised to return with force, and Cole knew the time had come to confront the man who had caused so much harm. His body tensed as he heard the wagon's wheels crunching against the snow, and a knot of dread formed in his stomach. But he was ready. He had made his promise, and he would not back down. Grabbing his rifle, he walked to the front porch, determined to protect his new family, to stand firm against the man who had threatened them all. The cold air hit his face as he stepped outside, his breath visible in the frosty morning light. Blackwell's wagon came to a slow stop in front of the house, and as the man stepped down, Cole felt a surge of anger. This was the man who had hurt the twins, the man who had taken Rebecca's trust and twisted it into a lie. Blackwell's eyes were cold as he surveyed Cole, his expression one of complete indifference. "Time's up, Brennan," Blackwell called, his voice sharp and demanding. "Hand over those girls, or I'll take them by force." Cole's grip on the rifle tightened, but he didn't raise it, his eyes locked onto Blackwell's with a quiet fury. "You're not taking them," Cole said, his voice low but unwavering. "Not while I'm still standing." Blackwell sneered, his eyes flashing with contempt. "You're harboring fugitives, Brennan. You're interfering with state business. The law is on my side, and I'm taking those girls whether you like it or not." His words rang in the cold air, but Cole stood tall, his presence unyielding. "These children were abused," Cole said firmly. "They're not going anywhere. Not while I'm alive." The two men stared at each other for a long moment, the tension thick between them. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, but neither of them moved. Finally, Blackwell took a step back, his face contorting with fury. "You think you can stop me? You'll regret this," he spat, his voice venomous. "I'll bring the sheriff and the deputies, and we'll see who has the last word." With a cold laugh, Blackwell turned and walked back to his wagon, his men following in silence. Cole watched them go, but the sense of dread didn't lift. He knew Blackwell would return. He knew it wouldn't be long before the sheriff's office became involved, and everything would escalate. But for now, the girls were safe, at least for the moment. Inside, Emma and Eliza were huddled together, their faces pale with fear. Cole walked over to them, kneeling down to their level. "Are you two all right?" he asked gently, his heart aching as he saw the terror in their eyes. Emma nodded, but there was no joy in her expression. "We're scared," she whispered. "We don't want to go back there, Cole. We don't want to go back to him." Cole's heart broke for them. He could see the lingering trauma in their eyes, the memories of everything they had endured. He placed a hand on their shoulders, offering what comfort he could. "I'm not letting that happen," he said, his voice firm. "You're safe here with me. No one is taking you anywhere. I'll protect you, I promise." The girls clung to him, their small bodies trembling, and for a moment, he could only hold them, offering them the security they so desperately needed. It was then that he made a decision. He would go to town. He would speak to Sheriff Dalton, a man he trusted, and together, they would expose Blackwell for the fraud he was. They would put an end to this once and for all. As the evening approached, Cole saddled up his horse, preparing for the ride to town. He had no idea what would happen when he arrived, but he couldn't let Blackwell's threat go unchallenged. He needed answers, and he needed to make sure that the girl's future wasn't decided by a man who had no regard for their well-being. Just as he was about to leave, the sound of wagon wheels caught his attention again. This time, the wagon wasn't moving slowly. It came rushing up the driveway with a frantic pace. The driver hunched over, struggling to control the horses. Cole's heart dropped into his stomach as the wagon came to a screeching halt in front of the house. The driver fell from the seat, collapsing onto the snow-covered ground. Cole ran forward, panic surging in his chest. As he reached the man, he recognized him. It was the same man who had been driving Rebecca's wagon. His breath caught as he bent over the driver, checking for a pulse. The man was barely conscious, but there was no mistaking the identity of the woman who had once been in the wagon with him. It was Rebecca, alive but barely. She was pale, weak, her body frail and emaciated, but she had somehow made it back. "Rebecca," Cole whispered, his voice breaking as he lifted her from the wagon. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at him with a faint smile. "Cole," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I couldn't let them take them." She coughed weakly, and Cole's heart shattered. "Shoo," he whispered, holding her gently in his arms. "It's all right. You're here. You're safe now." As he helped her inside, he could feel the weight of everything they had been through settling into his bones. Rebecca had returned, but at what cost? She was too weak to care for herself, let alone protect the girls. The battle against Blackwell was far from over, and Cole knew that time was running out for Rebecca. He placed her carefully on the couch near the fire, the girls rushing to her side, their faces filled with relief. "Mama!" they cried, their voices trembling as they knelt beside her. Cole stepped back, his heart aching with the realization that Rebecca might not have long to live. She had fought so hard to keep her girls safe, but her body was giving out. The girls, despite the joy of seeing their mother, could not mask the sadness in their eyes. Rebecca's death was inevitable, but she had fought for her daughters, and now, in this quiet moment, she had the peace of knowing they were safe. As Rebecca rested, her breathing shallow and labored, Cole sat beside her, holding her hand. He promised her that he would take care of the girls, that they would be safe, no matter what happened. And though his heart was heavy with grief, he knew he had to keep his promise for them. He wouldn't let Blackwell take them, not while he was alive. It had been 6 weeks since Rebecca's death, and the harsh winter had slowly started to recede, its cold fingers giving way to the first signs of spring. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of earth beneath the once frozen ground, while the air took on a lighter, fresher feel. Cole sat in his favorite chair by the fire, reading a book, though his mind wandered more often than not to the girls, who had settled into a routine, albeit a quiet one. Emma and Eliza were slowly adjusting to life without their mother, though the grief still lingered in their eyes. They hadn't been the same since Rebecca's passing, but they were healing, finding comfort in the warmth of the house, the horses in the barn, and the family they had now become. As much as Cole tried to focus on the present, he couldn't shake the weight of the past, the loss of Sarah, the heartache of losing Rebecca, and now, the responsibility he carried to protect her children. It wasn't an easy weight to bear, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was not only living for himself, but for them as well. The twins had grown more comfortable with him, calling him Papa Cole in soft voices, hesitant at first, but now with a sense of certainty that made his heart swell with a kind of quiet pride. He had promised to protect them, and though the pain of their loss was still fresh, there was a growing sense of belonging in the house. The day had started like any other. Emma and Eliza had spent the morning helping Cole around the ranch, collecting firewood and feeding the animals. They had come to see the routine as something familiar, something they could hold on to in the absence of their mother. As Cole worked in the barn, he couldn't help but notice the girls whispering to each other, their heads bent close, their faces serious, as if they were planning something. He kept his distance, letting them be, but curiosity gnawed at him. They had always been quiet, more observant than talkative, but today there was something different in the way they moved. They seemed focused, determined even, though they kept glancing at him with shy, almost guilty looks. He decided to let them have their space, trusting that they would come to him when they were ready. It wasn't long before they approached him after dinner that night, their eyes wide with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Emma stood first, her hands wringing in front of her, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Papa Cole," she began, her tone hesitant but earnest. "Can we ask you something?" Cole put down his fork, his attention immediately on her. He had never seen her look so serious, so vulnerable. "Of course, sweetheart," he said, offering a reassuring smile, though his heart quickened in his chest. "Anything." Eliza stood beside her sister, her expression just as serious, though there was a softness to her features that made Cole's heart ache. "It's really, really important," Eliza added, her voice quiet but firm. There was something in the way they looked at him, something deep, something that spoke of a bond between them, a shared sense of purpose. Cole set down his plate and turned his full attention to them, his eyes softening. He had raised them in the absence of their mother, but now, in this quiet moment, he realized how much they had already become his own. They had grown so much in such a short time, and now they were about to take another step toward becoming the family they had all been missing. "What is it, Emma?" Eliza Cole asked, his voice gentle, though the anticipation in his chest grew with each passing second. Emma took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for the words she was about to say. "We know Mama Sarah and Mama Rebecca are gone," she began, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "And we know you've been alone for a very long time." Eliza glanced at her sister, then back at Cole, her eyes filled with sincerity. "But we've been thinking," Eliza continued, her voice stronger now. "We don't want you to be alone forever." Cole's heart skipped a beat, a lump forming in his throat. He wasn't sure where this conversation was headed, but he could feel the weight of their words. "We want you to find someone to love again," Emma added, her eyes full of hope. "Someone who could maybe be our new mama someday." The room fell silent. Cole's mouth opened, but no words came out. He hadn't expected this. The girls, who had lost so much, were thinking of him, of his loneliness. It took him a moment to gather himself, to understand what they were saying. They had gone through so much, had seen the worst of the world, and yet here they were asking him to be happy again, asking him to find love, to rebuild a family. He couldn't believe it. These two little girls, who had nothing but each other, were thinking of his well-being, his happiness. His heart swelled with love and grief all at once. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at them, unsure of how to respond. "You too," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're thinking about me?" The girls nodded eagerly, their eyes full of earnest hope. "You give us everything," Eliza said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "You gave us a home, food, love, safety. You should have everything too." Emma stepped forward, her small hands resting in front of her. "Mama Rebecca told us before she went," Emma said, her voice a bit choked, "that love is what makes a family real." Cole swallowed hard, feeling the rawness of her words settle deep in his heart. "We have love," Eliza continued. "Lots of it. But there's always room for more, right?" The tenderness in their words was more than Cole could bear. He pulled them into his arms, hugging them tightly. He didn't know what the future would bring, but in this moment, he realized just how far they had come, how much they had healed together. "You two are the greatest gift I've ever received," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are my everything." The girls squeezed him tightly, and for the first time since Rebecca's death, Cole felt a sense of peace wash over him. Maybe, just maybe, they were right. Maybe when the time was right, when their hearts were ready, there could be love again. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. That night, as Cole tucked the girls into bed, Emma asked softly, "Papa, do you think Mama Rebecca and Mama Sarah would be happy?" He kissed her forehead gently and smiled through his tears. "I think they're smiling down on us right now, sweetheart." Eliza's voice followed, quieter but filled with curiosity. "Do you think they sent us to you?" "I know they did," Cole replied softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. He stood by their beds for a moment longer, the weight of their words echoing in his heart. He had lost so much, but now, with them, he had everything. Spring came quietly to the ranch, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. The snow melted, the earth softened, and the world seemed to breathe again. And in the midst of that change, Cole found himself filled with a new kind of hope. The girls were healing, the land was healing, and for the first time in years, Cole believed that maybe love could find him again. Weeks passed, and the girls flourished. They had become part of the ranch, part of the life Cole had built, and together they began to heal the broken pieces of their past. One Sunday, a warm spring day, a young woman named Miss Eleanor Hart arrived at the ranch. She was the new schoolteacher from town, and she came to visit, bringing ribbons for the girls' hair and an easy smile. Cole had noticed her before in town, but he hadn't expected to see her here at the ranch. Over dinner, they talked about the girls' progress, about the ranch, about life. It felt comfortable, easy. Eleanor seemed to fit naturally into their world, and the girls immediately warmed to her, their laughter filling the room as they talked. As the evening wore on, Cole caught himself stealing glances at her, and for the first time since Rebecca's death, he felt a spark of something, a quiet interest, a curiosity about what might lie ahead. That night, after the girls were asleep, Cole sat on the porch, gazing at the stars. He thought of Sarah, of Rebecca, and of the life he had once dreamed of. He thought of the girls, of their future, and of the possibility of love once more. There was a peace in his heart now, a certainty that life had more to offer than just loss. It had love, too, and maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest gift of all.